Welcome to REHAU Academy on Air. This podcast is a way for us to present non-technical information related to REHAU in a Q&A format with industry experts. I'm Max Rohr, the REHAU Academy Manager for North America. My guest today is Al Levi. Al is a business consultant, teacher, author, and former radiant heat contractor who worked in his family's HVAC and plumbing business. Al now helps other contractors learn to run their businesses with a column in Plumbing and Mechanical Magazine, a new book, and the 7-Power Contractor, Run Your Contracting Business with Less Stress and More Success. Welcome, Al.
Hey, welcome. Thanks so much for having me join in today.
Oh, you're welcome. So I know that you are a planning expert, and I wanted to ask you a couple questions on that topic. So what are some tangible benefits of planning?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to recognize who we are as contractors, whether you're a radiant contractor or any contractor. It's craziness. It's organized chaos, and sometimes I doubt it's even organized, at least my life that way. You know, coming from a third generation at my point and now onto the fourth, every day was a new fire was breaking out, Max, and it just seemed like, you put out a fire and then it would break out tomorrow, the one that you thought you had put out. And so learning how to plan rather than being planned for was really critical in the change in how my business is. It allowed me to leave my business and leave my two older brothers still doing well and set the stage for this. So the nature of planning is, in a nutshell, being able to work on the right thing at the right time in the right way, because everything has got your attention and you can't manage everything at the same time. That's what planning is.
And just the nature of like you said, the contracting business, that you may be in good shape and then you get that one phone call that the water heater at the big hotel downtown is out and they have 500 guests without hot water or something like that, and then the whole thing changes. So the more you can stay ahead of that, the better, and to not just have a day a month that you're planning, I think, is a good way to do that.
Yeah, stuff's going to happen. You're never going to be able to eliminate. The goal of it is to minimize the stress that you're going to run into every day. And if you have a plan, you can tweak a plan, you can alter a plan. But if you have no plan, it's just a fire drill every day. And so planning is really what leads to all of the other powers that I talk about, the 7 powers. But without a plan, you're not going to get to anything. So planning really is doing something that contractors, including yours truly, by the way, this isn't preaching from on high. I learned this because I've got a ton of scars on my back, Max. I fell into every hole. So here's what I have for you and your listeners. You don't need to fall in that hole. I've been there already. I crawled my way out. And the only thing I will give myself credit for is when I got out of that hole, I said, that was bad. I'm not going back in that hole because there's plenty of holes ahead of you. But I watched contractors for years and years, even when I was at work, and certainly now the last 15 years traveling all over the country and including Canada, where I work with people and I see the same symptom that I had, which is they fell in a hole, got themselves out, and fell right back. And your mom's a good example of that. You save them financially, teach them good habits. They fall away from the habit, and they're back in the same financial hole. Well, it's no different in planning and operations and staffing and sales, the things it really takes to run a company, no matter how great you are as a radiant heat company. And we were one of the first on Long Island. Matter of fact, in 1991, we were pretty much it. And so your business gets defeated not because of the lack of knowledge of what you can do. Your business gets defeated because you got to run the business. And that's really about, again, turning back to planning. I read a great book years and years ago, as a matter of fact, at your mom's suggestion, and Dan Holohan, another industry guru, E-Myth by Michael Gerber, which really did make a gigantic change in my life, because basically here's what I took away from it, Max. If you're only working in your business and never working on it, nothing's going to change, which is not that far from the Einstein quote, the definition of insanity is doing the same things and expecting different results. That makes sense?
Yeah, and the interesting thing about contractor planning, too, is that having seen the rep in the manufacturer world, too, that if we have a really good idea to what's around the corner for the contractors we work with, we have a much better opportunity to have the parts and pieces they're going to need to do that, 10 miles away from their shop,
where if we're learning about something last minute, either for reps or for manufacturers, we have to start figuring out how to expedite these things, and that's where things start to get lost in the shuffle. So that planning is helpful in all aspects, and all of the different people involved rely on the planning above and below, I think, and it starts definitely with the contractor.
Well, a simple thing that ties the two of us together, we're neighbors on other sides of the fence, if you will, talking about contractors and, suppliers and reps. If my warehouse is out of control and if my trucks are out of control, then there's no way I can work effectively with all of you. And if you aren't stocking what you need to do and you're not having what you need to do and you're not made aware of what it is and you're not keeping up, then that part of the relationship. So with the two of us are holding on to a rope, and either one of us let go, we both fall down. That's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, I think that's good. So what is you've talked about the pipeline to profitability. What does that concept mean?
Well, this goes to my dad was a serial entrepreneur, and he had myself and my two older brothers in business meetings. By the time we were young teenagers, we were allowed to sit in the back of the room and shut up and take some notes. But it was only because he wanted to expose us to a business, and he would answer all of our questions after the meeting was over, and really taught us a lot about that thing. One of the things my dad used to preach is everybody likes to think their business is all that different from everybody else's, and he would hold his thumb and forefinger about a millimeter apart, and he goes, that's how different they are. There are 7 things you have to master to own and run and operate any business, and they are learning how to plan, which is what we were just talking about, planning power, working on the right things at the right time, the right way. Operating power, which is having your written procedures and policies in place. So what it takes to run the company, 80% of what goes on, you are never going to cover 100%, but it empowers people to go out. So for instance, I always give here, Max, for this is if you had 2 really well-trained technicians and installers, and they were to go to 2 different homes and have to do the same radiant job, if you never defined in writing what it is, the Max Rohr way of doing work, what's the chances they could do it the same? And the answer is 0 to none. So until you define these things in writing, you're always going to be sabotaged. Now, it goes beyond text. It's, your accounts payable, accounts receivable, the CSRs that answer your phone, customer service reps, dispatchers, apprentices that arrive. Everybody who works at your company needs to have a short, succinct manual that tells them how to do their particular job. And then going on and leveraging to that is staffing power. And staffing power is really doing 3 things. It is finding the holes in your existing technicians. And I was the second best tech at a shop of 25 techs, and I had holes in my knowledge, Max, to the point that I would talk customers out of doing certain repairs and jobs because I wasn't that sure, which led me to understand if I'm the boss's kid and I'm doing that, what are they doing?
Yeah.
So your obligation as an owner is to find their holes, make it safe for them to expose the holes in their knowledge, and fix them. So that is your first task, finding the holes in existing people and fix it. And I mean inside and outside. This is not just about techs. And then the next thing is when you hire a new quote-unquote experienced person, of course in an interview they're going to tell you they can do everything. And they may not even be lying. But, maybe they watched their uncle put down radiant heat, and they think they know it. Well, there's a world of difference between watching and doing. And so even if they did do it, it doesn't mean it's the Max Rohr way of doing anything or the REHAU way of doing anything. So we've got to fix their holes faster.
And
ultimately, I'm sorry, one last one I got. Ultimately, the real freedom comes, though, when you are committed to do what I did, which is take young, willing people and train them from scratch. Instead of trying to constantly rewire people, give them the right habits the right way. And that's the best way, and every great company I've worked with will attest to what I just said.
Yeah, and I think across the board, inside and outside of our industry, customers like consistency. So if you install a system and then another person comes to finish it up and they have no idea where the first person started or where to pick up, that's not that helpful for the homeowner. It's the same thing that there's a coffee shop that I go to near the office in Leesburg, and regardless of who's there, they make a good cup of coffee every day. And I appreciate that, and I think that that's a universal thing. So if you've got some sort of method in place, whatever your industry is, that you are delivering a good product to everybody who walks through the door, that goes noticed in a lot of places, I think.
I think that you are hitting home on something that I think is vitally important because of all things. First of all, you look like an idiot. What was the last guy doing? Or if you just changed the second motor or the third motor, worse than that, and you don't even know that the other two were changed in the last 3 weeks, that's an issue. So yes, and so one of the things the operating manuals do is if first call, second call, third call, so this thing doesn't keep going on and how to red flag it, starting right from the CSRs when it gets to their desk, that's when it's got to get flagged, not by the time the tech is out in the field or the dispatcher at that point too. So that's where, again, the manuals begin to really get in front of this stuff instead of get run over by it is the best way I can describe it.
Yeah.
That's really kind of the thing. So today also, technicians, I'm of the age as is your dad. We used to be able to have the luxury of go in, look at it, fix it, and get out. We didn't have to talk to you. Well, now that doesn't fly anymore. That world has sailed. You actually have to talk to people. People want to know what's going on. They don't want to be left uninformed because it totally sabotages any customer satisfaction. You can do an expert job as a technician, leave the customer in the dark, and they will hate you. And if you do an excellent job of communication and there's a mistake, they are forgiving. It's a strange thing, but that I've seen it forever. And so you as a tech have to learn how to communicate. You have to prove to a customer that you ask good questions and you actually bother to listen to what they said. The other thing is that I would share here is don't get so busy diagnosing the problem that you forget the very first thing, which is diagnosing the customer. What's important to them? When do they hear the noise? Because until you figure out what's ailing them, what they want, what they need, what they desire, how they perceive an issue, doesn't matter what fix you come up with. It's going to fall short. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And I think that's really key is to find out what their expectations are because they may be expecting a new furnace because their old furnace is too loud, and that if you're replacing it with just a brand new version of what they had before, they may not be happy with that. So what they're asking for and what they actually want, I feel like are not necessarily the same thing all the time. So I think that's where really good communicators across the board, regardless of industry, find out the question behind the question, I guess. Why are you replacing your furnace today?
Yes.
Why are you looking to install radiant heat again, or whatever the case is?
Well, here's a great for instance here is, I was so busy in trying to consummate a sale, as a big ticket salesperson that I didn't ask enough questions, and sure enough, you get sabotaged. And here's what the truth of it is if you don't sell it right on the front end, don't expect anything to go right afterwards. So if I didn't ask enough questions, how many people are here? Do you do a lot of entertaining? Understand the hot water demands as a good example. What rooms do you use? Do you want to be able to, reduce the heat in these rooms? Is having a thermostat in every room, which is totally capable today, is that important to you? So I've got to find out, is on a scale of 1 to 10, where are we ranking here? 10 being this is a non-negotiable, got to have it, and 1 being, it's not so important. Here is the quirky part of this. I've had customers who were seeking to buy a brand new heating system because one room 5,000 feet away from the boiler wasn't heating the way they wanted. And they thought if they bought a new boiler, that would fix it. Well, here's what I'm going to tell you. If you don't ask enough questions and you don't look around and you don't find out where the problem spots are, you own it, my friend. You own it. And it's not a pleasant situation. So you got to get out. You got to look all around the whole thing. You got to ask enough questions. You got to be proactive in the sales process here, which is one of the things, selling power. Asking good questions, shut up, prove to them that you're listening either by paraphrasing, which just means saying their words back in a way that doesn't sound like a parakeet. I call it paraphrase, not parakeet. Or better yet, write it down.
Yeah.
Now, if you're a tablet guy, type it in. I don't care because at the end, you have to use their words. in the sales process, not to sell them something they don't want, but to affirm to them that you have been listening. I use the analogy in seminar all the time, Max. If you walk in to visit a doctor and whatever, your annual checkup and the rest of it, and they ask a question and you're talking and they're not writing anything down, get out of that office as fast as you can.
Yeah, that's going to be important to make sure that they've got the right ailment on that chart. And one of the questions that one of my coworkers, Greg Gibbs at Shamrock Sales, would ask if we were ever involved with the homeowner or end users, especially in a boiler change-out scenario or something like that, is there a room or space of this building that you're not comfortable in right now? And
yes,
everyone had an answer to that question. They'd be like, you know what, actually the garage is always a lot colder. But if you had just replaced that boiler, then you wouldn't have fixed that. And I think that I would notice when I would walk around with contractors to help them bid a project, if we just went to the mechanical room and then back out to the trucks, we probably didn't have a great chance of bidding that project correctly without knowing how many feet of baseboard or if the radiant was under 18 inches of concrete or something like that. Without seeing the rest of the structure, you're going to miss something. Yeah.
And actually in Sales Power seminars that I do, I teach ethical sales because that's the only sales I ever learned how to do, which means I'm selling in your best interest, not mine. My job is like a waiter in a great restaurant is to ask enough good questions, find out what's important to you, and serve. And if that ends up in sales, so be it, but there'll be quality sales. So one of the things I learned years ago, and I'll share a story which is somewhat related to this, is that I was over at a customer's home, and I was draining out the water heater to get rid of the sediment and rust at the bottom of a water heater. I hope you're all listening to this. And sure enough, she calls back, the customer I was at, and of course I'm at the dispatch desk today because I was everywhere. And she calls back in and she goes, your man was here, and he did something, and all of a sudden my faucet on the third floor is dripping.
Oh.
By the way, Max, all of this is way funnier today than it was back then.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Yeah, so here's what I learned from there. I stopped doing with the blinders on. So if I came for a plumbing call, I'm going to look at it all. If I come from a heating call, I'm going to look at it all. If I go for a cooling call, electric call, look at it all, because here's what the truth of it is. So listen, my friends. Whenever you go to a home and you do any work at all, everything and anything that goes wrong in that house for the next 2 weeks, in a customer's mind, you caused it. So you owe it to yourself to get around and take a look. Now, if you're out there to give a quote like Max is talking about, and you don't get out and look at everything and ask the questions you need to ask, it's all going to cave in on you. But if you do, here's what I promise. No one else is doing it, and automatically in a customer's mind, you are elevated. So if push comes to shove and you're a little bit higher on price, which I always was, you're going to win. You're going to win more than you possibly can imagine. And you're going to have a much less, this is kind of fits to what we started here today, right? Have a plan. Have a plan.
I like that approach too, because then let's say they have 3 bids and you're in the middle and they decide, if there was some additional value there, they're kind of expecting that, that you don't have that, I feel like has less opportunity to get into the bidding war after the project's been done and say, well, you were the lowest bid and this should cost this much less than I'm expecting. If you say, no, this is the value that I brought from the start, so this is why it still costs that much. I think that there's in the super aggressive price war type contracting, I think that if you don't have anything to show for what your price was, there's more possibility for someone who is buying the system from you to say, well, it should cost less, and you eventually, some people just say, okay, yeah, I guess so, instead of, no, this is what we agreed upon, and this is what I do, and I do it really well, and it was executed perfectly, and that's my price. So I don't know, what that I don't know how that translates for everybody, but I think that being clear on what you're providing to the customer helps you stand behind your prices.
Yeah, and is it okay if I share a little bit on sales here? I know I want to be careful about time. Yeah, so here's what I went and belonged to Contractor 2000, which is Nexstar, which is where I met your mom and dad years ago, and Dan Hollahan, and it was encouraged me to go. And it was wonderful. But what happened is, for the first time in my life, I did a budget, and I found out what I really needed to sell at.
Yeah.
And it was the most enlightening day and the most awful day of my life in the same moment, because all of a sudden I knew that what I was doing, was just for exercise. I was doing work for exercise, not work for money and profit. And by the way, you making a profit, my friends, as contractors, is in the customer's best interest, not yours. Customer's best interest that you charge the right amount. And this is why I share in sales is, no matter how good your warranty is, if you're out of business because you didn't charge enough, your warranty is worthless. If the people that you're sending to my door are not trained in your facility, but they're learning on the job with me, I'm being punished, and that's because you didn't charge enough. You don't have people that can answer right. You don't have service at the end of the day. There's a million things that you are shortcutting and hurting me. I'm going to put a boiler in hopefully once, every 20, 30 years. I'm going to put radiant heat in, every 20, 30 years. People need to understand that this isn't I'm going out to buy a cup of coffee. This is something that's got to be right and got to be designed right and done right and the rest of it. So when I got that, Max, here's what I realized when Richie and I, my brother, we sat down and we just looked at him. We just looked at each other and go, Richie says to me, do it again. He's talking about the budget because we were hoping it would come out different. But we ended up with the price, and it was really an enlightening and what it did is it just pointed out that not everybody's our customer. If you're only interested in the cheapest price, there's always going to be somebody who doesn't know what they're doing that's going to charge less and hurt the customer.
Yeah.
And we had to clean up a lot of those jobs.
Yeah.
We were easily known for that. But what had happened is that if we were 30 to 50% on a regular basis, it just changed my sales process. I'd go through, if you look like, act like, and smell like your competition, you're not worth anymore.
Yeah.
And so our guys were just right. We covered the floors. We did all that. But I explained all of that, Max, in the sales process.
Yeah.
And I had photos to show them. And I had customer testimonials where people would say something to the account. It was a little more than I wanted to spend, but I'd never use anybody else.
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of things that you need so that you can go in and price the job right, because there isn't a second chance on most of these things.
No. Yeah, that's a good point. And that makes me think, too, that at ASHRAE last year, you and Richie were standing around just kind of going back and forth telling war stories. And I wanted to see if you've got a weird thing that you've seen in the field story from either you or from Richie.
Yeah, we had I had one in particular myself, which was a customer called up, and I was at the desk, and she said, I had somebody come in and put something in, and now I don't have enough heat. And I said, well, can I have your name and address? And I get the name and address, and I go look it up, and I go, can I call you back? And I call her back, and I go, I put in that heating system 11 years ago, and I'm looking in the records. I haven't heard anything. She goes, I don't care. It's not working. I don't got enough heat. I said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to come back and take a look, and I apologize. So I get out there and I go, is there anything that's been changed on the job? Anything I should go? She goes, absolutely nothing. I walk over to the dining room, and I see this beautiful 10-foot sliding window door. And where I had put the baseboard, 10 of those feet are gone. Yeah. And I said, is this the room that's cold? She goes, yes. I said, is this door new? She goes, yes. I said, here's your answer. I said, because you added all this glass, which was never there before, even though it's quote-unquote thermal, and you took away some of my heat. Now, I can fix this problem, and I have ways to do that. But be aware, and it goes back to what you already instinctually know. For 10 years, this was not a problem. And finally, she calmed down, but that was under the weird. And you can't – that's why, again, sometimes being in the office too much and thinking you can diagnose these weird things, you can't. You got to get out. You got to go. And here's the thing that also sabotages technicians and even owners is the first – I know this is one that really just gets us crazy, myself and Richie in particular, but everybody that might come. The lady's crazy. Customer's crazy. So well, they may be crazy. That's possible, but not everybody is. And they're not calling you because they're bored or have nothing to do. There's an issue. And that's what we talked about before, diagnosing the customer. That's what you have to do first.
The problem may just be a lack of understanding of the system, and there may not be anything that you need to change, we've had some cases too where people were just
Absolutely.
getting really aggressive with their setback thermostat on
yes,
a radiant
they drop
system.
it down. Yeah, exactly right. They drop
it down
in the coldest
20 degrees.
weather.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they expect it to be right back as soon as they get home, and then they're turning it up to 90, and then it overheats. And there was nothing wrong in that case. It was just a misunderstanding of how the system operated. And then we went through it, and they appreciated the time that we spent to explain it to them, and then were comfortable without replacing a boiler or doing anything drastic. But if you walked into that same, let's say they called a different contractor, and the contractor walks in and just replaces some equipment or something like that, now they're out more money and they're more frustrated. So that wouldn't be the right way to fix that situation. And it goes back to being a good communicator to figure out what the issue is, and maybe it's just a perceived issue, and that should be an easy one to fix. Well,
it also goes to as contractors, we only have a million places to be in the next half hour, and so we're running. And all you're doing is just messing up every place you go. You got to learn how to control your schedule, and this goes tying back to planning and the rest of it. And also, operating manuals where people go out and do the work right. But if you haven't sold it right, again, as I said before, so here's the for instance, which is in your contract, you need to explain about what the normal setbacks are and how to set this up and the parameters of the job on the front end, unless otherwise you're going to play up on the back end. And now there are times you can catch up. And that's what you guys are so great at when I'm talking about, the reps and the rest of it. But it is always a catch-up. Yeah. And it's much better if you explain on the front end what it can and can't do, and understanding and sharing this communication. And, while not putting fear into them, but what it does in many ways. So can I share a quick sales story before we wrap up?
Sure.
So, when we first were doing Radiant in 91, on Long Island, we were new, and you pretty much could charge what you want. And we didn't experiment on our customers. We put it in our own houses. We put it in our designer showroom office, and really learned it from the ground up before we would experiment in your house. Having said that, you're still putting it out there. And then competition was coming along, and so I had to change my speech because now there was some price things. So it went kind of like this: go, Max. When we put down the radiant tubing, we do an air test for 24 hours because we recognize we're burying it under concrete, and we have to do everything in our power to make sure it's right. Now we do all the photos and everything else, and we have the traces on it. But we're going to do a job that's superior to anybody else for doing things just like this. So the customer, when I leave, I already know what they're thinking. Well, nobody else mentioned an air test, and nobody else told me about that. And he's right. You're burying it under concrete.
Yeah, and I like to bring that up too in the PEX world now, is to say, okay, you're not going to put your concrete over your boiler and over your pumps, and those are things that we can adjust or service. But we want this pipe to be the right material in the right spacing before we pour concrete over it, because it's no fun to have to pull that back up.
But see, my point is, turn it into a positive.
Yeah.
And sell it with a smile on your face. So it is this gentle way of letting them know that things can go wrong, but I'm going to do everything to minimize that. Good thing you called me.
Yep.
In a nice, not braggart way. There's a way to do this.
Yeah, I like it. So who would you say is one of your favorite teachers, and why, Al?
Well, it's going to be boring because I'm going to say Dan Holohan of the industry, and he's just because also you got to recognize I was one of the luckiest guys ever, because Dan and I were fast friends, and he came out in the field and rode with me in the truck, and there are not many people in this country that can say that. But he was much more than just a heating teacher to me. What people don't know and what people have missed about Dan Holohan through the years, his ability for heating and all the other stuff is phenomenal. He's a great communicator, phenomenal. But what he is a great person for sales and marketing. He understands people, what makes them tick and how they respond. And so I was already a pretty good salesperson. I was already a pretty good marketer, and I only got a million times better because of my relationship with Dan. And what he taught me about, how people think and how they respond, and, what's in their own best interest and stuff of that nature. And if you read any of Dan's stuff along the years, you'll see that. That's what I think. I give myself credit for this, Max, is I knew how great he was at sales and marketing, above and beyond the way he bailed me out of so many jobs along the way.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that he does really well is he just asks good questions. That's, I think, at the heart of a lot of that.
Which is what the key for a great communicator. The best salespeople and the best communicators are ones who ask good questions, shut up, listen, and affirm that you have heard the person.
Yeah.
And that was my dad, which is why Dan and my dad were so close. Dan was the fourth brother.
Yep. Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you for joining me today, Al.
My pleasure.
You can find more about Al Levy's consulting at 7powercontractor.com, including his new series. So you can click on the Contact Al button and learn more about his Build Your Operating Manuals program. You can also find his column in Plumbing and Mechanical Magazine. So thank you again for joining me.
Oh, by the way, at Reeves Journal now. I'm on a second magazine.
All right, and Reeves Journal.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Al.
Thanks so much for having me on.
To find REHAU technical training, go to na.rehau.com/academy and check out REHAU America's YouTube channel. Our Twitter handle is @REHAU, and you can always ask your sales rep for more information about local trainings.